Imagine a city street, bustling with life. Children playing tag, neighbors catching up, vendors selling fresh produce, and street performers drawing in a crowd. This is the heartbeat of a community, a space where people connect, where life and culture unfold together, all in a shared public space. Now, picture that same street, not as a community hub, but as a barren stretch of asphalt, roaring with the constant surge of cars. No kids, no conversations, no laughter, just traffic. The life of the community is gone. This wasn't a natural evolution. It was a result of one of the most calculated transformations in modern history. A theft of our streets, our spaces, by one powerful intruder, the car.
What's America's best-selling small luxury car? What? Ford Mustang 2.
So much flair, so debonair.
For thousands of years, streets belonged to people, places where life happened out in the open. Markets, festivals, parades, and protests, and simple everyday connections. But in the early 20th century, a powerful shift began. A carefully orchestrated movement emerged, one driven by car manufacturers,
that the Henry J is America's #1 buy.
their lobbyists, and their bought and paid for politicians. Those very roads ripped away from us and forced to bow down to a new master. City planners started by dismantling the idea that roads were for people. Laws were rewritten and new traffic ordinances were created, all designed to favor cars. Pedestrians, once free to roam the streets, were now corralled onto narrow sidewalks, and car lanes widened to accommodate the endless parade of vehicles. Slowly we came to accept that roads were meant for cars, that this is the way it's always been. Why would we plan for non-car alternatives when everyone should be behind the wheel? And we should be grateful, if not bothered, when a sliver of it is thrown to bikers or pedestrians. Roads on their own are wonderful simple tools in humanity's arsenal of development. However, since serving a new master, we've seen them become an agent of chaos, the delivery system of all the negative effects the overwhelming explosion of cars has imposed on our society. This theft didn't just change the look of our cities, it ripped out their social heart, turning places meant for connections into cold, concrete rivers where people became outsiders in their own neighborhoods. How did this happen? And more importantly, how can we reclaim what was stolen? Roads are once the veins of community life, pulsing with shared freedom. Walkers, riders, and children all moved in the rhythm of mutual respect. No towering signs flashed commands, no strict rules confined the flow. If you stepped into the street, people adjusted. The road belonged to everyone, a seamless dance of coexistence. Was it perfect? Of course not. Streets had their fair share of challenges. Horse manure and discarded garbage weren't exactly idyllic features. But these were solvable problems, challenges humanity could have tackled outside the shift that was to come, a shift whose consequences are far worse than any pile of manure ever left behind. In 1886, the shift began. Carl Benz's invention of the automobile would turn the world of shared streets on its head. Suddenly, a new force thundered into these communal spaces, disrupting the delicate balance. Pedestrians, once free to wander, now found themselves dodging vehicles that moved at previously unimaginable speeds. As these early cars hit the roads, accidents began to spike, and with them, an alarming rise in fatalities. The public was horrified. By 1900s, just 14 years after the first car, dozens of people were dying. By 1918, the number exploded to over 10,000 per year. Car owners, typically wealthy individuals, quickly earned a dangerous reputation. Viewed not as pioneers of progress, but as reckless speed demons and joyriders, tearing through the city with little regard for the lives of others. Communities were outraged. Stories of public outcry and even mob retaliation spread, reflecting the anger at what seemed like a blatant disregard for human life. Cities scrambled to respond, enacting speed limits as low as 10 miles per hour, and in some cases even requiring cars to have a person walk ahead, waving a flag as a warning. Police forces dedicated resources to managing this new chaos. And for many, these measures weren't enough. Cars weren't just a danger, they were a crisis. Then came a turning point. Instead of accepting responsibility or pursuing meaningful safety regulations, the car industry launched a ruthless campaign to shift the blame. They used the narrative of personal responsibility. They introduced the term jaywalking, a slur meant to shame anyone on foot who dared to cross streets outside designated areas, as ignorant, outdated, a Luddite who simply didn't understand the new rules of the road. Pedestrians who had lived their whole lives moving freely through their communities were suddenly being blamed for the accidents that were killing them. This rebranding didn't just happen by accident. Automakers like General Motors staged flashy displays like their 1934 Futurama exhibit at the World's Fair, selling a seductive vision of a car-dominated future. This was a carefully crafted campaign to cement the car's dominance over streets and to absolve drivers and car makers of responsibility for the escalating danger. Meanwhile, police forces became enforcers of this new car-centered order. Pedestrians were forced to the sidelines in their own neighborhoods. Streets were no longer for people. They were the domain of the machine. This was a cross-industry conspiracy that reshaped our streets. This shift towards car dominance paved the way for a cascade of government-backed road construction projects, each more massive than the last. None of them designed with pedestrian safety in mind. A world designed and paid for by the people, yet dedicated to the machines that displaced them. This choice has led to the deaths of hundreds of millions worldwide, a price we pay till this day. Today, cars come with safety features that feel like they're ripped straight out of a sci-fi movie. Airbags deploying in a blink, seatbelts designed to absorb immense force, and anti-locking brakes that keep your wheels from betraying you on a slippery turn. On paper, it sounds like we've mastered safety, but here's the kicker. Despite all these marvels, our roads are still shockingly deadly. Every single year for the past 25 years, about 40,000 lives have been lost on US roads. 40,000 people. That's not just a number, it's a stadium filled with families who never got a chance to say goodbye. And it gets worse. In 2022 alone, nearly 6 million accidents were reported. Over 42,000 people didn't make it home, and another 1.6 million were injured. Then there are the 4.2 million cases of property damage, cars totaled, insurance claims spiraling out of control, and families left scrambling to pick up the pieces.
Well, everybody was still on the scene, but one of the babies, heartbreaking.
But those numbers don't even tell the whole story. What about the survivors, the ones who walk away with injuries that never quite heal, chronic pain that haunts them in every step, every laugh, every attempt to return to normal? Or the families that had to take on caregiving, financial burdens, and a lifetime of what-ifs? And here's a bitter pill to swallow. Despite billions poured into making cars safer, the roads themselves are no less deadly. Why? Because it was never really about safety. It was about giving you the illusion of speed and efficiency, no matter the cost. What if I told you this wasn't an accident, but a design choice, a deliberate trade-off where human lives were the collateral damage for a car-first world? Think about how many times we've seen a driver slam on the brakes to make a last-second exit, forcing everyone behind them to do the same, or risk a rear-end collision, or the times you've had to swerve sharply to avoid a car that missed the stoplight. We've all been there on either side. The exit sign is so small you only notice it as you speed right past it, or you're jolted into a sudden stop after a sharp curve you didn't see coming. These moments are all too common in American roads, where hazards often seem baked into the design. And the signs and signals that could have prevented these close calls, they usually show up after someone has paid the ultimate price. So what's the go-to fix? Not redesigning the roads to prevent danger, but slapping up another sign, or worse yet, giving drivers more room to drive. Add more lanes, widen the roads, let the cars go faster. Problem solved, right? Not even close. In fact, these so-called solutions tend to make things worse. Take adding lanes. On paper, it seems logical. More space means less congestion and more room to react in emergencies. But what actually happens is something called induced demand. Build a bigger road and more cars will show up to fill it. Instead of easing traffic, it creates even more of it. If we truly want safer streets and connected communities, we need to slam the brakes on highway and road expansions. You've probably experienced a similar cycle on a personal level. Remember starting with just one room in your parents' house, where everything you owned fit neatly. Then you moved into your first apartment, and suddenly, that collection barely filled the space. So you bought more to fill it up. And then the apartment felt cramped, you upgraded to a bigger place, and of course, filled that too. It's a cycle that only stops when you run out of money or space. Now imagine if those limits didn't exist. If every time you wanted more, you had a bottomless budget and endless storage. That's what's happening with highway and road expansions. Government budgets for these projects seem limitless. Whether it's local taxes or federal dollars, there's always money to make roads wider, faster, and bigger. As long as there's room to expand, there's no real incentive to explore alternatives. But what if we stopped? Freezing road expansions would force a shift in behavior. Instead of driving solo everywhere, people might consider buses, trains, or even dusting off that bike in the garage. With enough demand, policymakers would finally prioritize building robust transit networks, giving alternative transportation a real shot. Then there's a problem with wider lanes. They lull drivers into a false sense of security, leading them to speed up, zone out, and miss the very dangers they're supposed to avoid. And when a crash does happen, speed is a deciding factor in how deadly it is. The faster the car, the deadlier the outcome. So why not just lower speed limits to make roads safer? Sounds simple enough. But this is where things get weird. Traffic engineers often rely on a metric called the 85th percentile speed. This measures how fast 85% of drivers feel comfortable going on a given road. The logic is that setting the speed limit to this level will keep most drivers in compliance and traffic flowing smoothly. So it doesn't actually limit car speeds, it's more like an endorsement saying this is how fast cars are already driving here. And if a new study shows that 85% of drivers are speeding, the solution is often to raise the speed limit to match their behavior. Instead of encouraging slower, safer driving, this system normalizes higher speeds over time. It's like saying we studied theft, and since 85% of thieves steal less than $5,000, let's just legalize theft under $5,000 to save resources. But at least we're safe at home, right? Those disconnected street networks we live in are designed to keep traffic and speedsters out of residential neighborhoods. Except they don't. What they actually do is feed the animal by trapping you in car dependency. Take that store just a few hundred feet away from your house. In theory, you could walk there, but in practice, you'd have to navigate fenced-off tree lines, 8 lanes of high-speed traffic, and a sprawling parking lot just to reach the entrance. It might as well be on the other side of town. So, like most Americans, you hop in your car to navigate this maze of obstacles. But what about those without cars? They're left behind navigating the same hellscape you escaped from, but on foot, with all the dangers that it entails. Imagine for a moment you don't have access to a car, not by choice, but because driving isn't an option. Maybe you're too young to drive. Maybe age has taken that option away, or maybe you simply can't afford the steep cost of car ownership. Now think back to those disconnected street networks in our suburbs. That store you can see from your front door might as well be on the moon. For drivers, the solution is easy. Hop in the car and navigate the maze. But without that privilege, every trip, no matter how short, feels like a life or death gamble. You start walking, clinging to the sidewalk for safety, until it abruptly ends. Now you're stuck walking along the edge of the road, fully exposed, praying drivers are focused on the road and not distracted by a text or the latest viral video. And then comes the ultimate challenge, crossing the street. Maybe there's a gently sloping curve that vaguely suggests cross here. But there's no paint, no signage, nothing to tell the drivers to slow down or look out for you. These pseudo crosswalks are invisible to people behind the wheel, leaving you standing on the curve, scanning for gaps in traffic, bracing yourself for what feels like an inevitable free-flying lesson. We've all seen this sort of intersection, haven't we? Sitting in our cars at a red light, watching someone attempt to cross this chaotic intersection and think, thank goodness that's not me. But for countless of Americans, it is them. Every day, children, the elderly, and people just trying to get by without a car face roads that aren't designed for people, left to navigate a world built for cars, not humans. Drivers feel insulated, protected by their metal bubble and airbags, but for pedestrians, the stakes are brutally clear. It's tempting to think the solution is simple: just get those deprived souls behind the wheel, and the problem disappears. But in reality, this salvation furthers the damnation you're fleeing from. With every trip you take in your car, you are directly contributing to the very problem that drove you to take your car in the first place. But there's another way. A way to design streets that welcome everyone, whether they're walking, biking, or driving. A way to reclaim our roads and turn them into shared spaces where safety and community go hand in hand. It's not just a dream, it's a choice. First, we need to document these road design failures, capture inconsiderate drivers, the unsafe crosswalks, the sidewalks that vanish into nothing. Show the world what's broken. But don't stop there. Tell the stories behind these spaces, the frustration, the near misses, their impact, because stories move people and powerful storytelling can inspire real change. To tell those stories, you need more than just images and words. You need to pull people in, make them feel what's at stake. A great soundtrack doesn't just complete your story, it elevates it. Think about your favorite movie scene. Without the right music, it's just awkward grunts and banging.
Let's work it!
Even worse, imagine it's set to generic corporate training video music. Yuck. That's where music becomes more than background noise. It sets the mood, draws people in, and amplifies the emotions behind the message. Music turns visuals into experiences. But here's the problem. Finding the right music can be a nightmare. Searching endlessly, worrying about copyright strikes, or worse, having your track disappear from the platform entirely. That's why I use Epidemic Sound. With a library of over 40,000 tracks and 90,000 sound effects, Epidemic Sound has the perfect vibe for any story. Want to build suspense? Done. Need to hit those deep emotional notes? Easy. Want to add energy and momentum? They've got you covered. Whether you're highlighting moments of urgency, frustration, or hope, Epidemic Sound has the range to match, and their licensing ensures your work stays protected across platforms. Storytelling matters, and every story deserves to be memorable. If you're ready to create content that not only informs but moves people, start with Epidemic Sound. Click the link in the description for a free 7-day trial. Because when stories are told the right way, when they're truly felt, they allow for our emotions to lead and our logic to follow. There's so much we can do to breathe new life into our car-dominated streets, turning them into places where people linger, connect, and thrive. The best part, many of these changes don't require massive overhauls, just thoughtful adjustments that put people first. Let's start with something simple yet transformative: street furniture. Adding benches, planters, and public art to sidewalks doesn't just beautify the place, it creates a natural pause point. Imagine walking down your local main street, greeted by benches shaded by leafy trees, planters bursting with flowers, and a sculpture or mural from a local artist. Suddenly, the street feels alive, inviting you to slow down, explore nearby shops, or catch up with friends. These small additions don't just attract people, they signal to drivers that this isn't a racetrack. Seeing people relax and enjoy the space naturally encourages safer driving. Greenery, too, has a way of completely transforming streets. Planting trees along sidewalks doesn't just add aesthetic appeal, it creates a cool, shaded haven that offers a welcome break from the heat. Over time, these saplings grow into towering canopies, turning sun-scorched asphalt into refreshing walkways, perfect for strolling or cycling. Streets like this don't just look better, they feel better, fostering a vibrant, active community. And when you add street vendors, food trucks, and pop-up markets, the energy skyrockets. These mobile hubs of food, craft, and culture bring a buzz of activity, giving locals and visitors alike a reason to stop and stay a while. Every vendor adds a unique flavor to the street, creating an atmosphere that's as much about connections as about commerce. For a truly transformative touch, events and festivals can completely reimagine a space. Whether it's a neighborhood block party, a 4th of July parade, or a cultural celebration like Chinese New Year, streets evolve from mere thoroughfares into dynamic community hubs. Even small gatherings can foster connections, showcasing local traditions and bringing neighborhoods closer together. But sometimes, reclaiming spaces requires bigger changes, like repurposing empty buildings or unused lots for community-friendly functions. Picture taking an old abandoned building and transforming it into a community center or an art space or a local cafe, something that brings more people together and breathes life into an otherwise forgotten structure. This approach, known as adaptive reuse, can be powerful, but it often requires a bit more than just elbow grease. It might mean navigating local government regulations, tackling zoning restrictions, or dealing with other red tape. By returning streets to people with good design, we turn roads into more than just paths for cars. These spaces foster conversations, commerce, and a sense of belonging, creating a street that serves us all. Now, I know these changes can feel like an uphill battle. Sometimes I wonder how different things would be if the roads hadn't been stolen from us. What would it be like if we never had to fight to take them back? But here we are, to push forward, to fuel the drive to reclaim our space. We need to understand what cars have cost us, how they've changed our lives in ways we may not even realize. If you're ready to explore these hidden costs, join me in my previous video as we dive into a world where cars never existed.